The Intelligencer, Wheeling, West Virginia, October 22nd, 1994.
Something in the American psyche wants to romanticize the infamous criminals of the nation's past. Thus, we have the legends of Jesse James, a cold-blooded killer, and bank robbers Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and the flamboyantly brutal Al Scarface Capone. Wheeling's version of this strangely romantic recollection of society's underbelly is William Big Bill Lias, the gangster boss who ran Wheeling's once thriving rackets during the middle decades of this century. Lias often claimed he was merely providing a product that people wanted. Prostitution, gambling, and tax evasion are as old as civilization itself and will never be eliminated, but Lias made it his business to exploit.
If you go back to when the immigrants came over here, they usually came without their wives. They usually came to earn money to send back, to bring their wives and their family here. Therefore, when you had steel mill towns and coal mill towns, usually outside of those steel mill entrance gates, you had houses of prostitution, illegal gambling, or any way else they could get those men's money. The men being alone is probably one of the reasons why they frequented the houses of prostitution, in order to keep the men happy. And the men really weren't that happy. I mean, the conditions that some of these men worked under, 12-hour days, 7 days a week, no vacation, no time off. If you weren't there, you weren't paid. There was no sick pay or anything like that. These men needed a place to go get a drink, to wind down, to raise some hell. There were times in our history where we tried to stop it, but we're really unsuccessful in stopping it. There's been times in our past where the question was raised at a city council meeting whether or not they should enforce the laws. And either no decision was made or they voted no. Brought a lot of money into Wheeling. Wheeling was known as one of the best gambling places between, if not the best, between New York and Chicago. This was, although a small town, this was really a wide open town. There wasn't anything you couldn't get here.
I can remember before the time of Prohibition, Wheeling was dry, but theoretically it was dry. I think people who were thirsty did not die of thirst. And West Virginia went dry 4 or 5 years before the nation did. But Bridgeport across the river was still wet. And what is reputed to be the longest bar in the world was there, Ungerleiters. But I didn't pay much attention to it when I was 4 and 5 and 6 years of age, except I remember seeing these drunks come back and walking across the island. They zigged and zagged a bit, because I don't think I'd ever seen an intoxicated person before then.
It was a mill town, imported labor in here. I think they wanted to keep the labor happy, so they provided them with amusements. Amusements were prostitution, gambling, and liquor. Of course, liquor was illegal then, but you could get a drink any place in town here. A lot of people said that you had the mill owners and the mine operators lived out the pike, and they wanted that kept nice, and as long as everybody was happy in town and worked, and that's all they cared about.
There was one time where one of the civic organizations of women would meet women at the B&O train terminal getting off the train and warn them of the vices in Wheeling. So it was a pretty wide open town. They warned them, I assume, about going into the gambling places or getting caught up with the prostitution and that. And I think also West Virginia was dry before the rest of the country. So that opened up bootlegging here. And that's how Big Bill Lias got his start as a bootlegger at age 13. He was running booze for his brother at age 13 from Ohio to West Virginia in his brother's bread truck.
Sure we got liquor, sure we got booze, sure they got it. Okay. Fort Henry Club's supposed to be an exemplary club of all the swells of Wheeling. I'm a past president of it. I'm not a member any longer. Don't use it. They had liquor at their parties in there. All the swells went there. Where do you suppose the liquor came from? It came from Bill. Where do you suppose they sent the colored boys to get booze? Down to Bill's. Whiskey was needed. It's not an aphrodisiac, as you well know, but it is good for your moral, your well-being, your health. Of course it is.
Well, in the days of Bill Lias, when he was the gambling kingpin here, of course, I was a little young for that, but I'm sure that the downtown was absolutely wild in some of those areas. He ran bordellos and bars and about everything else you could run, but he was a peculiar individual. I mean, I knew him not well. He's old enough he wouldn't have been a friend of mine, but I knew him, and my father knew him well and used to do some work for him. Bill would have told you if he were sitting here today that the kinds of things that he promoted and that he operated were things that were going to go on anyway. But that he thought that the kinds of things like the unnecessary drug business that was in its very early stages in those days were things that would destroy people. And if he was going to be successful, people couldn't be destroyed. They had to be active and able to do things.
Those were the days where there weren't any gray areas. You knew what was right and what was wrong. There was a lot of mystique connected with the guy. You know, everybody knew who Bill Lias was, but you couldn't get next to him. You couldn't get near him, you know. He was an underworld figure, and everybody knew it. And he owned a big piece of the town and all the gambling and all that kind of stuff that went on. So, in that era, there were people shot and killed on the streets and all that sort of thing, and it was never discovered who did a lot of these things.
Well, Bill Lias lived out in Monticello. I know where his house is, where he lived. And he also, when he'd had these people killed, then he'd send the widow the enormous big bunch of flowers, they said. My husband knew him. My husband played the numbers back then. Yeah, he was a great big fat man, had dark hair, but he was a racketeer of Wheeling. Yeah. I guess if you'd meet him or something, he might kill you tomorrow, but he'd treat you today, Somebody said, I don't know how true, that he did kill his wife or had her killed, I don't know. But the day he got out of prison, he served a term, I think, for taxes or something. And the day he got out, boy, there was a big party in Wheeling.
He used to drive a big Cadillac. He was very heavy, 300 and some pounds. And he used to have a seat in the driver's seat that was on a pivot, so that when he stopped the car, he would pivot the seat, and then he could drop his legs out the door and raise up out of the car. Usually when you talk to him, you never get out of his seat. He just turned it in the car with the door up and just sat there and talked to you. Then when you're through, he turned the seat back and pulled the door shut, and off he went. But he was a real character. Great big guy, called him Big Bill and all that stuff. Everybody in town knew who he was.
I would classify him as being a folk hero in Wheeling. During I would say the late 30s, 40s, 50s, Bill Lias reigned in Wheeling. He was a gangster, for gosh sakes. He had a building diagonally across the street from West Virginia Independence Hall that was called Ziller's Steakhouse. He also had a bar in Center Wheeling that was torn down earlier this year. And he was adored in Wheeling because he supported the young people and gave money to be used in the playgrounds. He gave people extravagant gifts of fruit and things at Christmas. He'd walk in the newsroom of the newspaper and give all the women sterling silver cigarette holders. He did outrageous things.
Bill Lias, you can never knock him to me for this simple reason. During Depression, my father was a janitor down at his place on 24th Street. My sister died in 1931, and we didn't have no money to, bury my sister. So he told my dad, he said, Gene, you just come down and we'll work it out and we'll see that she's buried, So my dad, when the funeral was over, he went down and he said, I want to start, paying for the funeral. He said, that's on me. Bill Lias buried my sister. $600 and some, and everything was paid for. And he even gave my dad extra money for us kids to eat on.
I knew him well, and his wife, Alice, lovely, lovely lady. I used to go to their home every Christmas Eve, Christmas party, out to their apartment on 15th Street. Bill was great. He was a fine, fine man. My mother and father, every Christmas, had in their front hall the largest, at that time, living rhododendron plant available, I'm sure. It's enormous. Who sent it? Bill and Alice Lias. An appreciation for what my mother did for them. But they were good. Bill, they were kind people. Charity, he supported every charity.
Have you heard of Bill Lias? He was, they say he was a gangster. I know it was in the paper there somewhere. And at times, it would come winter time. And you didn't have no coal. He would just have a great big coal truck to come and put coal in the middle, in a certain place in the street, and you just go get this coal. Then in the summertime, the water, fire hose you see on here, he would have the firemen to turn this hose. You ever seen it? And all the kids would run out there in the water for maybe about half an hour. But we didn't realize he would pay for this. Because, it was city water. And they said he was a bad man, but we didn't think. They said he was a gangster. We didn't know. He was just doing good things, and so you didn't think he was a bad person. He put that hose out there, and all types of kids would run right in that water. It wasn't you black and I'm white, or that's the way it was.
Yeah, I grew up on Wheeling Island. I can remember Bill's smile most of anything. How pleased he was when the kids would run up to him. We'd see him coming out of the racetrack, and all the kids would run out on the corner and wave at Bill, and he would stop, and he'd come out with a fistful of $2 bills. And where the $2 bills came from was the $2 bets at the racetrack. And he'd pass them out to the kids, and we would all go to town and go to the shows for the weekend and whatever. But it became a habit. We were looking for Bill every weekend, and naturally, every time we saw Bill, he would come out. But he was a very generous man, is how I remember him.
My father used to be in the lumber business, and Bill Lias liked him because he worked hard. He had called my father one day, and I must have been 8 or 10 years old, and asked him to come over to the racetrack. He wanted him to build a sweat room for the jockeys so they could control their weight. And Bill's style of doing this was not to get into any elaborate discussion. He would say, I remember the conversation, we said, Russell, which was my father, on top of that building over there, I want you to build a room. And I want that room so the jockeys can sweat in it. And when you get it done, send me a bill for it. And that was kind of the directions that you got from him as to what you were supposed to do. And he'd say, you know what I want? Yes, okay. Get it done, send me a bill. That's how he talked. And he was very short, sentences. Well, when we first arrived there, he said to my father, tell your son to wait over there. And Dad said, why, Bill? And he said, I don't talk good. I don't want kids to hear me talk. And I think it's because he swore a lot And that was just part of his style, and he didn't want young kids to hear that, So he made me wait. Of course, I could hear him anyway where it was. But anyway, when they got all done with the conversation, he turned to my father and he handed him 2 passes to get into the racetrack. And he said, "Russell, take your kid in to see the ponies run." So he said, "Thanks, Bill." And we started walking toward the gate. And as we got closer to the gate, Bill yelled, he said, "Russell, don't bet the ponies. They run for me." Tom O'Brien was prosecuting attorney here for probably 20-some years, all during this era. And I've always understood that he had an arrangement with Bill. And his arrangement was that so long as Bill kept his activities within the parameters of acceptable behavior, and that Bill participated with keeping undesirable elements out of town, in other words, didn't bring them in or saw to it that they got out, that was acceptable to the prosecuting attorney, knowing full well that he was operating houses of prostitution, knowing full well that he was operating gambling emporiums or whatever, which were illegal. The prosecutor, I'm not going to say overlooked them, but I think there was an understanding between the two of them that if you allow children into these places, and I hear about it, I'm going to close you down. That's why I think Bill ran things as well as he ran them, because I think he knew that if he ever got out of those bounds, the game was over.
I remember, and this is not to say anything against my father-in-law because he was a policeman here. And he was walking his beat, and it was late at night, and he walked underneath this window, and he could hear people saying, 7 come 11, and got baby who needs a new pair of shoes, and he's smart enough to know what's going on. So he calls the main headquarters and says, "Hey, you got to send some people up here. We're going to go raid this place." And the guy said, "No, wait a minute. Where are you at?" And he told him. He said, "No, we don't want it raided. I'm not going to send any men." And he said, "But this is it's illegal here." "No, it's." And he said, "Well, I'm going to raid that." He said, "Go right ahead, but I'll tell you something. Come next winter, you're going to be in the only beat in Wheeling that you can't go in and get warm or get something to drink to keep you warm in the middle of the night, in the dead of winter." That was telling him, you don't raid things unless you're told to raid them. And, he was an honest policeman. It was in those days, it was everywhere.
They were doing business. Police chief and Bill Lias. And something happened. He double-crossed Bill or something, and he went in the police department after him, and his police chief jumped out the back window. Up the alley. Name was McGale, M-E-G-A-L-E. He was a chief. He was a nice man. He and my daddy went to school together and all this stuff. But old Mac went up the alley. Who cares? Nobody cared. Yeah. One of those deals. Yeah, great. All kind of stuff used to go on. Fun stuff. Nobody took it serious. That's the way life was. Oh, get in there, chief. My day worked for 9 different chiefs of police. I think I worked for 8. Something like that.
They didn't last long.
Well, if they lasted long, you knew they was getting along with somebody. Playing a game. Someone come in for a year and a half, and make somebody mad. That was it. They interviewed my father one time for chief of police. Called him in, city manager and somebody else. Said, "Pee Wee, what would you think about being chief of police?" Dan said, "Well," he said, "am I going to run the police department? We'll talk to you later." That's the last he heard of it.
See, everything in the city at that time, while it was against the law, it was condoned. In the old days, they said that it was unwritten, but as long as everything stayed below the creek, then this was considered entertainment for the working man, prostitution, gambling, so forth. So as long as it stayed south of Wheeling Creek. And that was an unwritten law, but it was observed. You never saw women working bars uptown. It was below the creek. And the place was loaded with saloons. I mean, there were just one right after the other because there were big payrolls here. You forget when the whistle blew, there were 5,000 men on the street. You know, there would be 2,500 men going in and 2,500 men going out.
And a lot of those folks that worked in those plants, I mean, that was part of their life, is that style of living, you know, the gambling, the house of prostitution, that whole business was a part of their lifestyle.
I used to trim hedges for a man by the name of George Lewis. George Lewis had the 10th Street waiting room. This is where the streetcars all met. And if you lived in Warwood and you worked in South Wheeling, you came to 10th Street and you transferred to another car to go to, or you went to South Wheeling or the Island or Martin's Ferry or Bridgeport. And this was the crossroads of Wheeling, 10th and Main Street. And he had this restaurant called the 10th Street Waiting Room. And in this waiting room, he had slot machines, as most of every place had slot machines in those days. And he told me one time that his take from those slot machines, I think he had 6 machines in there, and that his take, which represented an exact 50-50 split with Bill Lias, and the Lias's man would come in once a week, take the machines off, take the money out, count out the money and split it 50-50. His take was $1,500 a week. Now, we're talking about the 30s, and $1,500 a week, no tax, was a lot of money. And you can imagine that this was just one joint, and Bill Lias was getting 50% of this and hundreds of other joints just like this. Well, I shouldn't say just like that, because the waiting room was a natural. Because they changed streetcars there, these mill workers and miners would get their checks, and they'd cash them. They cashed checks at the at the waiting room and the bar hotel across the street, and a lot of the check money went into the slot machines, of course. And
let's face it, he brought a lot of dollars into town, not only in terms of the gambling and all that stuff, but the racetrack and all the other people that drifted in and out of here. And it meant a lot, I think, to the merchants. You know, there's a lot of folks came here. But he still would not tolerate if any of his bar operators had kids in there, they're apt to go across the river, you know, in cement boots, because he just wouldn't tolerate that kind of stuff. I mean, he had rules, and that was it. You don't break them. And he was very strong. Plus, I think a little of this, he was an interesting guy that way. Doesn't make his activities right, but it's the way he operated them, I think. But of course, that was going on in a lot of places. It wasn't just here. Wheeling wasn't the only town that had gambling.
Some had the philosophy that this brought a lot of money into Wheeling, and it did. I mean, you know, this being a big gambling place, you could walk in off the street and gamble and play cards and roulette and things like this. People came from Cleveland and Pittsburgh and Columbus and Youngstown and places to get into a game.
Everybody got paid off. Big money. They came from all over to do that because it was run correctly and it was protected. You didn't have to worry about, you know, another bunch of people busting in the place and robbing you, and you didn't have to worry about the police raiding the place. So it was but there were poker games around Wheeling, they were always table stakes, and people used to get in those games, and they'd bet their restaurant, their bar on, you know, go across the table back and forth all night long. Wild and woolly stuff. There was never any law enforcement, as long as things, you know, were kept orderly. And a lot of people claim that the streets were a lot safer then than they are today in certain sections of town. But nobody would ever bother you if you were patronizing any of these places, because then you'd be interfering with business. So make sure that you didn't do it again. And protect your clientele.
We had one man who had 6 kids, and he was one of those who liked to play pinball machines. And he liked the slot machines. And Bill Lias made sure that everybody had at least one in their place. You know, it was kind of George, I've known you all my life, and you need one of these. My father says, no, Bill, I don't. And he says, yes, George, you do. You need a front window, and yes, George, we don't want to have to replace it, but you do need a slot machine. And so my father says, well, I guess you're right, Bill.
He understood people very, very well. He knew what made people tick. He knew how to get your attention. He knew how to get you to do what he wanted. Stories are told about cars blowing up and that sort of thing, but he knew how to get your attention and whatever it took, exactly.
So they put it in, and this friend of my dad's, George, lived down the street. He loved to play the slot machine. He'd get paid on Friday night about 5 o'clock. My dad would cash his check, and he'd slug the slot machine all night long, putting his nickels in until he was broke. That and drinking the beer. Well, one day, George's wife came over, and she asked my dad if he would please, when he settles his tab, don't give him any more, don't let him play them, because they didn't have any money for groceries. The kids needed shoes. They didn't have any clothes, and it was cold. And my dad said, I didn't know that. So he'd give George credit all week long, and he'd put it on the tab. And on Friday, when he came in to get his check cashed, he'd hand it to my dad. My dad would take the money, what he owed him, and he'd take out some more than what he owed him, and allow him a certain percentage of it to put in the machines and to drink his beer. And then he would meet the daughter, who was my age, in school at the back door, and he'd give her the money and say, take this home to your mother. So they didn't starve to death. My dad made sure of that.
In the late 30s, I knew a young man, a very nice fellow, happily married, 1 or 2 children. His wife says, Henry, can you get Ted? I said, what's up? Well, he hasn't come home yet. He had a good job in town, got paid about every 2 weeks. He'd go to a local place where he could buy beer, and he would keep drinking it and playing the slot machines and the like. And this wife said, the last 3 paydays, he's come home without any money. Unfortunately, that marriage did not last.
Zeller's Steakhouse was a lovely place. I had a job after school at Fahey's Florist. One of my jobs was to take a panel truck full of flowers and get down to Zeller's and cut flowers all through that place. There was one man who was a prominent lawyer celebrating his wedding anniversary, and he went and had too much to drink, went up to the gambling tables and lost what he had and wrote some IOUs and stuff like that. And the next day, one of Lias's people came to his office and handed him his cash and his IOUs and said, hope you and your wife enjoyed your anniversary party. See, that way he kept the people in Wheeling from raising too much cane about what he was doing, because he was a good guy. Now, if you were from Pittsburgh or Columbus, Cleveland, you get fleeced, but he took care of the local people.
People spent money for the girls and spent money at the thoroughbred racehorse track and meals. It was great because the money wasn't going out of town. The money was staying in town. The big Bill Liases and people that ran it were buying other bars. They were hiring employees. The only time the money ever left here was when he paid off his dues to organized crime. He was a Greek gangster. So for Big Bill Lias to have a part of the wire service, he had to pay money to Johnny Torrio. He also paid money to the Magadino family in Buffalo, New York, to stay in business. But other than that, the money stayed here.
He didn't have any hesitancy if somebody was doing some things they shouldn't be doing. He had no hesitancy at all to fix it, whatever was wrong. Most of us wouldn't do that. Most of us, I don't think, would have the personal conviction, even though if we were involved in something that was marginal operation, I'm not sure most of us would have the courage to face people who were competitors and back them off. Bill did. He did have that kind of courage. Now, Yeah, they all say you can stick a gun in the guy's face and he'll do a lot of things, and I'm sure that that was a part of the process, but I'm not sure I could stick the gun in somebody's face, but he could. Or he could say, that will never happen again, and he meant it, and you know he meant it because he backed it up before. Plus, I think he was much brighter than people thought he was. He was Greek. His language was a little broken.
Sure, you get a bad name. Sure, Bill got a bad name by virtue of having been in Detroit. He got a bad name when the Youngstown tribe tried to move in here from Steubenville. No way, they didn't move in. The Youngstown group of gangsters and underworld and so forth, who had overrun Steubenville, wanted to move into Wheeling. They didn't get to. Bill ran the town as far as law enforcement and misenforcement, or whatever they want to call it. Sin was concerned.
One of the biggest employers at one time was Wheeling Downs. It was with a city within a city. They had their own police force, and own doctor and nurses and hospital and feed stables and concession stands and gift store. I mean, it was a big operation. Parking. I mean, there was a lot of employees there. So, yeah. So it was important to the city. When he lost the track, a lot of it stopped.
It was bad that anyone should have that kind of control over a city. But there were so many people who swore by Bill Lias because and the family was in trouble. He took care of them. And he was God to a lot of people. And the same as Capone was in Chicago. And so it was virtually impossible to dethrone someone like that because he had such popular support. And so much of the economy was based on his gambling, the racetrack and Zeller's Steakhouse, the Pirate Cafe. Zeller's Steakhouse was reputedly the biggest gambling joint between New York and Chicago. And again, Lias controlled the whole thing.
Zeller's Steakhouse was one of the greatest restaurants you've ever been in. Of course, the building's there, but the restaurant's no longer there. I think it was a great place because he had the big hitters here for the gamblers. And those are people who like to live a high lifestyle, and he provided it in that restaurant, and then they could take them upstairs where the card rooms were. And there were no limits in Wheeling. That was my understanding in gambling. There were just no limits. And Bill would back up whatever wasn't backed up. Night in this business of doing business with my father's lumber company carried on into my generation. And I got one call one night about 2 o'clock in the morning at home when I was back working at the lumber company after I'd gotten out of the Army. It was Bill Lias, and he says, "Hops," he'd call you by your last name. "Down at Billy's, can you come down? I need something." My wife said, "Where are you going?" I told her. She said, "You got to be crazy to, And I said, "No, it's just the way the man does business. He's up all night." So I went down, and sure enough, he was sitting down there at a place called Billy's Bar, and he was sitting at a table where they were gambling. And when I went in, I told somebody, that I was there, the guy at the door, and he went over and said something to him. And Lias, I walked over to the table where he was standing, and he said, "This place doesn't look so good." He said, "Panel it all and put a new ceiling in it and fix it up, and then you see him for when you get your bill." And this was the guy that carried his money. This was a little fellow that followed him around that paid all the bills and kept track of everything. Most of it was all done in somebody's head. There weren't books that I knew of. But anyway, his instructions to me were to get some people in there and make the place look better, which 2-3 weeks work and you get that all done.
The gambling activities took place not only at the Zeller Steakhouse operations, but there were slot machines in the Fort Henry Club, in the Elks Club, in the American Legion Club, the Veteran Foreign Wars Club, as well as in the Country Club, which at that time lay outside of the corporation limits of the city of Wheeling. To give you an idea of how the general public approved of all this, I can tell you that at one time, I believe it was arranged that the operators of the private clubs were arrested for conducting gambling operations in connection with the slot machine operations. And I think it was also arranged that the Justice of the Peace who conducted the hearing on the warrants issued was John Moran, whose office was on Chapman Street, across the street from the present City County building. And it was arranged that the hearing for all of these various clubs commenced with the American Legion, which was, of course, a very popular club. And the defense was a defense which I had never heard of in my legal career, called the Home and Castle Amendment. The theory espoused to Justice of the Peace Moran was that people could do anything in their home and it wasn't a violation of the law, and that a private club was an extension of your home, and that therefore the warrants were without foundation. The Justice of the Peace agreed with that, and so this gave a further life to the activities of the slot machines in the community for another period of time.
To me, it's kind of a, Bill was a good guy and Bill was a bad guy sort of a thing. Gambling wasn't a good thing. Houses of prostitution weren't good things, I'm sure. But if somebody was going to run it, I'm glad it was him rather than somebody else. That's kind of the way I always felt about it.
My partner of many years in business was a racing commissioner for the state of West Virginia. When we were in business, we had a box over there. No problem. The nice people, you use that expression, the nice people went there. And he filled a need, if you will. That was it.
It was a regularly run business and strict accounting and all. But in the Lias operations, where the elaborate gambling layout was, a bookie operation was conducted there. And when one would place a bet, the bet would be placed with an individual behind a cage or at least at some kind of a machine. Your ticket was printed out. The customer got the original. A copy was printed simultaneously for the management, and then a copy was also simultaneously produced for the Internal Revenue Service, so that Mr. Lias was doing what he could to keep on the right side of at least the federal law.
The numbers racket, I can remember. There are lots of people who made a living writing numbers for Bill Lias. And everybody played the numbers. It was done openly, and because he controlled things. He controlled all the government. This is a facet of wheeling, I think, that a lot of people don't want to recognize. But it's there, and it's the prostitutes. I mean, it was part of our entertainment and fun as 15, 16, 17-year-old boys, going down to Water Street down here and walking by the whorehouses, and the whores would sit openly in the window in those days and entice men in. And we would go down and tease them. But that was part of our sport. That was our amusement, was to get down and tease a whore.
There was a tenderloin district in the south of town, 23rd Street. It was wide open prostitution and neighborhood kids. It was nothing for them to go over. I'm talking about young adolescents, to go over and sit in the houses of prostitution because you could listen to jukebox free, and the ladies of the evening would give you free soda pop, And I knew people that used to do that, and there was never anything morally wrong with it. It was just something you did. And when it got dark, this was usually in the summer months when it started getting dark, and the customers would start coming around, and the women would say, "Okay, kids, clear out. It's time for business," and they'd kick us out.
There was a bar down there for years. It was called the Roosevelt, and it was only a narrow little place. And as a boy, I remember they used to have poker games upstairs, and in that area there were a lot of houses of ill fame, if you will, brothels. But it was a big thing to go up and look in the window and have them chase us. We were just kids, crazy kids.
While attending welding classes at McKinley Trade School located in South Wheeling, at that time, we had to drive through the notorious red light district of Wheeling. Being young and ornery at that time in our lives, when I say we, there's four of us that rode together to welding school, would stop in front of the house operated by a well-known madam called Alma Henderson, who would usually be sitting in a large front window motioning to us to come in. He'd say, come on. We couldn't hear her, but she was going like this. But we had no intention of going in there. We just stopped there to tease her.
Alma Mae Henderson bragged one time, but she was never rated, that she didn't know a half hour ahead of time. But Alma Mae was rated, and she paid her dues, and paid her fines, so the city could make some money, and the girls went on their way. She drove a pink Cadillac, and that pink Cadillac was always parked in the back of her place. And you knew that Alma Mae Henderson was around if that Cadillac was there.
And one thing about Alma, she always had a Snow White Chrysler. You could always recognize Alma coming when you saw that Snow White Chrysler. Parked in front of her place of business. Did we ever go in? Nah. We had fun teasing her, though.
Alma Henderson was the queen of prostitutes and was just as famous in Wheeling as Belle Watling was in Atlanta. She drove the first white car in Wheeling. It was a white Chrysler. My boyfriend, who was later to become my husband, worked at the dealership, which was Delaney Miller, down in Center Wheeling, where Famous Supply is now. He said she would bring her car in to be serviced and said, now I must have my car on such and such a day because that is Wheeling Steel's payday. And if that car is not sitting in front of my house, I will lose a lot of money. She was very businesslike. She spoke as if she were talking about maybe a millinery business or something like that.
They used to say, and I don't know this for the fact, that the gals who worked in the bordellos that Bill used to insist on and pay for trips to the health department to make sure there was nothing wrong with them. He insisted on it.
When Bill Lias was in power in Wheeling, he had a host of good friends. We had no crime in Wheeling. Prostitution was totally under control. The girls were in every single week, completely examined and so forth. We didn't have any trouble.
And although they say that he was never involved in prostitution, and I can't really prove that he was. I really don't know. But I do know this. When I got out of the service, for a few months I worked for Bory Incorporated as someone who delivered refrigerators and stoves and things like that. One day we delivered, I don't know how many, maybe 10, maybe more than that, new refrigerators. And it was all to houses of prostitution. And each madam, when we went in, would say, just take it to Big Bill Lias and he'll sign it. So whether he was giving a gift to these women, I mean, I don't know. But, as far as I'm concerned, all the madams got together and said, we need new refrigerators. And he paid for them. Why else would you do that?
When I went into the Army, and you'd tell people where you were from, people you met from all other parts of the country, Wheeling was known as gambling and prostitutes. That was all Wheeling was known. Steubenville was much the same, but Wheeling was a little more notorious than Steubenville. But that's what most people knew about Wheeling. Anybody who had heard of Wheeling, that's what they heard about.
I think it was like this in a lot of industrial towns in the United States, because the idea was if you can keep the working man happy, then work, and that's it. But here, as I said, this whole thing was small and contained. So everybody got to know everybody in here, and it was not like, there was a section of town which was 2 miles away, which was the Tenderloin District. The Tenderloin District was 13 blocks from the cathedral, and 2 blocks from St. Alphonsus, which was a big German church. I mean, all these people intermingled. That was a time when there was honor among thieves. These people give you a word, you could put it in the bank. They're absolutely scrupulously honest. Now, they had another attitude maybe towards gambling laws and liquor laws. But as far as moral turpitude, these guys were, that was all business. It was all a business thing.
Wheeling Steel owned about 20 houses, homes. I'll use homes first in my vernacular. In the neighborhood. Dwellings. I think there were 23 of them, and I'm probably wrong, but there was 20-something. Well, as soon as we two young fellows came up there to run the plant, my goodness gracious, the ladies of the evening descended on us. They rented the houses from Wheeling Steel, and they had a business there of sorts, the oldest there is, far older than Wheeling Steel. They wanted new toities, and they wanted new potties, and they wanted new wallpaper. They wanted new floors and new front steps and all these things they thought we were going to give them. Well, we weren't. And that was two young fellows. That was very, very interesting couple of months until we got them settled down. So we got them settled down. And we didn't interfere in their business in any way. Wheeling Steel wasn't frowning on the business as long as they got their rents. They paid their rents or they were out. Wheeling Steel has since sold all those. Do I say homes or do I say houses?
The industrialists who live out the pike, you got to remember that a lot of them owned factories. A lot of them had a lot of employees. The steel company, for example, there used to be at least maybe 3 large employers right here in the city, part of the steel company. They're no longer here. Those plants are no longer here, but they were here, and they employed thousands of people in them. And a lot of those folks that worked in those plants, I mean, that was part of their life, is that style of living, you know, the gambling, the house of prostitution, that whole business was a part of their lifestyle. So when you say, how did they let it go? I don't know that they ever really tried to not let it go. I don't know that they ever sat back and said, we can't abide that in this community. I think they said to themselves, we won't be participators in it. And if it goes on down there.
Those people of whom you speak bought their booze from Bill Lias. Some of them who were probably the best churchgoers in town followed up on some of the other activities.
It seems as though people gave their own view of how life was in their particular section. But it reminded me of a story I read a long time ago about these blind men. They were asked to describe an elephant, and of course one of them touched the leg of the elephant. And he said, they asked him, how is it? And he said, oh, it's as large as a tree trunk and it's very rough. The other one said, oh, no. He says, it's not that way at all.
The Blind Men and the Elephant. It was 6 men of Hindustan, to learning much inclined, who went to see the elephant, though all of them were blind, that each by observation might satisfy his mind.
The first approached the elephant, and happening to fall against the broad and sturdy side, at once began to bawl. Bless me, but the elephant is very like a wall.
The second, feeling of the tusk, cried, Ho, what have we here, so very round and smooth and sharp? To me, 'tis mighty clear this wonder of an elephant is very like a spear.
The third approached the animal, and happened to take the squirming trunk within his hands, thus boldly up and spake, I see, quoth he, the elephant is very like a snake.
The fourth reached out his eager hand, and felt about the knee. What most this wondrous beast is like, is mighty plain, quoth he. 'Tis clear enough the elephant is very like a tree.
The fifth, who chanced to touch the ear, said, E'en the blindest man can tell what this resembles most, deny the fact who can. This marvel of an elephant is very like a fan.
The sixth no sooner had begun about the beast to grope, than seizing on the swinging tail that fell within his scope, I see, quoth he, the elephant is very like a rope.
And so these men of Hindustan disputed loud and long, each in his own opinion exceeding stiff and strong, though each was partly in the right, and all were in the wrong.
So I guess it all depends on how you see things and what section of Wheeling you were in, how you came to meet these people, and what your experiences were with these different people that have been previously mentioned. One of the people that they mentioned was Mr. Lias, and of course many people worked for him during the years and have their side to tell of their experiences with him. Other people may not have had as pleasant experiences, and they of course are telling their side, which is fine. But that's the way it occurred to them. And of course everybody doesn't agree. So it's again, it goes back to the blind men. They're just telling their part of the story then. And there are many aspects to everything, so they're just telling one facet of it.
You've been listening to the voices of Bill Carney, Henry Schrader, W.W. Holloway Jr., Bill Hogan, Ron Hobbs, Esther Schaub, Beverly Flutie, Gene Long, Easter Pitts, Jim Frio, Richard Millard, Hal O'Leary, Mary Lou Henderson, Frank O'Brien, George Thomas, John Cogut, and Leanne Davis, with concluding thoughts by Joanna Gusta and the Wheeling Poem Readers. The spoken history of Big Bill Lias and Wheeling's gangster era was written by Carrie Noble Klein, edited and produced by Michael Noble Klein from field recordings of the Spoken History Project. This is a production of the Wheeling National Heritage Area Corporation. Charles Flynn is the executive producer. In Wheeling, West Virginia, I'm Michael Klein.